Hello, professionals. My name is Rico Aladdin, and I am the founder of Professional Lunch. Today, we have another great guest for you. It's a retired attorney in the healthcare industry. His name is Paul Richard. I'm going to give Paul a minute to introduce himself. But first, before we start the conversation, I have a favor to ask you. If you have not followed Professional Lunches, I suggest you do that because we are bringing some of the big names in town here to share their experience, their knowledge, and also advice for young professionals who are launching their careers. So, now, thank you so much for agreeing to follow Professional Lunch on our social media. Richard? Paul. I keep calling you Richard, for ever since I met you. But Paul, thank you so much for being on Professional Lunch today. Please tell the Professional Lunch audience a little bit about yourself.
Well, glad to be here. I am a retired healthcare lawyer. I still am a licensed attorney in North Dakota and Minnesota. Have been so since 1979. But I'm not currently working for anyone. The only job I have is working at retirement, and I'm also a member of the North Dakota Ethics Commission and have been for the last 5 years.
Wonderful, wonderful. It's so nice to have an attorney on Professional Lunch because I don't think I've had one before, so you are the first. Hopefully you will leave the door open to come back and share some more knowledge. So one thing we like to ask professionals who come on the platform is what inspired them to start a career in the industry that they are. So you are in the healthcare industry. So what inspired you to start a career in healthcare and also healthcare law?
Oh, it's kind of a long story.
Okay.
So, you have to go back to where I grew up and where I came from. And my parents farmed between Horace and Hickson, if you know where that is, about halfway between the two towns, which is in southern Cass County. I'm one of 11 children, and really I did not have any mentors from the standpoint of people who were lawyers or doctors, and the only person I really knew at the time when I was growing up in healthcare was my sister-in-law, who was a registered nurse. When I started at NDSU in 1970, I really didn't have a focus on what I was going to major in, so I really was focusing on taking general courses. And I should add that I was the first individual in my family to go to a 4-year college. And then my younger brother followed me and did so as well. But in any event, throughout my freshman year, was primarily focused on business and I'll call it general classes. And at the end of my freshman year, my father died. And until that point, I worked on the farm. And that's how I made money to pay tuition and live. And after my father's death, my mother moved off the farm. And one of my older brothers, I'm number 10 out of the 11, so I have my brothers and sisters are all pretty much older than me. And so my brother took over the farm, and I moved, full-time into Fargo at that time. And I needed a job. And I was kind of thinking maybe it'd be interesting to work in a hospital. I really didn't have any career goals at that time. As I said, I was just taking general courses to try to, fill out the general requirements of any degree. So then I went in to apply for a job at that time it was called St. Luke's. Today it's called Sanford Health. And what I was really looking for was a job as an orderly, which today they call them nurse assistants. But the shift work wouldn't work with my class schedule. And so the HR person who I happen to know and is from Hickson asked me if I knew how to file paper. And I said, I think I know how to file paper. If I don't know how, I'll figure it out. So I took a job as a file clerk in medical records, and I was 19 at the time. And that really kind of introduced me to, I'll call it the business of healthcare. And it piqued my interest and wasn't anything I planned. And so I decided as I went through my sophomore year at NDSU, I said, well, I probably better declare a major. And so I just added up my credits to see which credits align most to which degree, and Business economics kind of fell out for my 4-year degree. And then I also, at the same time, as I said, it piqued my interest in work in healthcare, but I didn't know if that was in direct caregiving or if that was in the business of healthcare. I was probably leaning more towards the business of healthcare. And so I decided to pick up nursing as a minor at NDSU. It was an associate degree at the time. And so in 1974, I graduated with both degrees and passed my state boards for nursing and took a job at St. Luke's full-time now as a quality review nurse to implement a program that at that time the federal government was requiring of all accredited hospitals who took care of Medicare patients to review their quality of care. And so in that job, and I did that for 2 years, and I had told my boss I was going to give her 2 years and then I was going back to school. And I was either going to go back into obtain a master's degree in healthcare administration or law school. But again, I really didn't have any mentors, didn't know any lawyers, didn't know any judges. I'm a farm kid.
Yeah.
And but in my job, a full-time job, I was exposed to the lawyers and some of the, I'll call it the legal side of healthcare, and that really interested me. And so I decided in 1975 that I was going to take the LSAT, the law school admission test. I was actually sitting in a class in biochemistry when I decided that, this is not for me. and I walked out of my biochemistry class and went to the counseling office. And back then you had to file everything in paper and sent it in and took the LSAT and applied at UND and was accepted in February of 1976. And it was kind of a hard decision because I was working full time and I was making money, and I knew if I went back to school, I wouldn't be able to work. So I was going to go back to the broke existence of a student life and, borrowing some money to pay for tuition and all the other things that you have to pay for when you're a full-time student. And I knew there was no way I could work, during my first year of law school. And so kind of thought about it for a while. And I remember having a conversation with my mother over dinner one night, and I said, well, I got accepted to law school, Mom. What do you think I ought to do? And she said, you know what you want to do. And I said, you're right. And so then, so that's really how I ended up in law school. And then after law school, I was offered a job with the law firm that did the legal work for St. Luke's. And that kind of launched me into my path of healthcare law. So,
wow. Yeah, I have so many follow-up questions on this. One particular moment when you mentioned that you didn't have a mentor, anyone who were in law before,
right,
to kind of guide you. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because this is what I want Professional Lunch to be about, where people can connect with, maybe from a very small town, they can connect with a professional who is in the field that they might be interested in,
right,
and just learn at least the very basic of that field. And that's very, very, very important. So now describe to me how you ended up in the role that you played for at Sanford for so long.
Well, I'd like to follow up on your comment about mentors, because I do, even though I didn't have I'll call it legal mentor, while I was trying to, from 1970 to 1979 when I graduated from law school, I certainly had some in law school.
Okay.
But one of the most important messages I received after my father died in 1971, and I was kind of trying to sort out what I was going to do, my boss at the hospital, still working part-time, recommended I talk to the hospital president. And I said, yeah, like the hospital president has time to talk to a 19-year-old kid who's trying to sort out his life. But in any event, part of getting answers and finding your path is having the guts to talk to people.
Yes. And
reaching out to people and seeking advice, even if you may not know them. So I thought to myself, well, if she says I should talk to him, so I decided to call up his secretary and say, hey, can I have a time with, his name was John Finney. And she said, sure. And so I went down and talked to him, and he's one of the most gracious men I had ever met, and just a very wonderful man, great leader. And so we were kind of talking, and he was asking me about my history at that point. Maybe I was 20 at that time, and so I talked to him a little about it, and I said, I really don't know what path I should take. And he said to me, Paul, I said the path to what you are meant to do or be is not always a direct path, and that has always stuck with me. Yeah. And the reason he said that, because his path was not a direct path. He had been a teacher, and then he became a pharmacist, and then he became the president of the hospital. So very disparate degrees in education and skill requirements. And I always remembered that. So I never really worried about, I said, I'm going to pursue initially the education I want. And I really felt I wanted to try law school. Didn't know if I would succeed. Law school is very hard. But I will say that as hard as it was, in the first semester of my first year, I said, I am where I belong. And loved it. Loved everything about law school, loved everything about studying the law. So to answer your question about how I ended up in my position with Sanford, so as I said, when I graduated from law school, I got a job with the firm that did the legal work, what was then St. Luke's Hospital. And they were probably 40 to 50% of my work at that time. I did a lot of different things. I did real estate work. I worked on malpractice cases and malpractice defense. I did a lot of corporate transactions. I think I've worked on every corporate transaction that St. Luke's, Fargo Clinic, Merit Care, Sanford did from 1980 to 2017, 2018. And so basically, it was kind of a mixed bag practice throughout the 80s. And in July of 1993, about 31 years ago, the Fargo Clinic and St. Luke's merged. And that kind of expanded my work requirements. So basically by 1998, I would say that at that time, the hospital, at that time it was called Merit Care. The Merit Care work took up probably 95% of my time as a lawyer. And in 1998, the then president, Dr. Gilbertson, another great mentor who I worked with many times, and a little funny anecdote about Dr. Gilbertson, he was a retired neuroradiologist before he became the president of Merit Care. No, he wasn't retired, but he was a neuroradiologist. Mm-hmm. And so he's the only boss I had that ever actually stuck a needle in my back. So and they talk a lot about bosses sticking needles somewhere in your behind, but he's the only one because he did a myelogram on me. Okay. But in any event, so in 1998, Dr. Gilbertson asked me if I would come in-house as the first general counsel of Merit Care, because they did not have in-house counsel at that time. It was a hard decision. I really liked my private practice. I liked the kind of the mixed bag of but again, as I said, predominantly it was working for the organization as an outside lawyer. And so I decided to made the decision to go in-house and started out as the first general counsel and as part of Dr. Gilbertson's executive team. And I did that. And then fast forward through the merger with Sanford Health. And when Sanford Health and Merit Care merged, I took the job as a chief legal officer for the system, and I had accountability for the legal work. We had our own captive insurance company, compliance, and I was also part of, at that time, my boss, Kelby Krabenoff, was my boss and part of his executive team.
Wow.
So that's how I ended up, and then I did that until 2013.
Okay.
And in 2013, Kelby was looking for a new leader in the Fargo market, and I volunteered. And my thought was, I'm not an administrator, but I told him, I said, I'll give you your money back guarantee. If you don't think I'm doing what you need as a market president, you can send me back to the legal bench. I just wanted, I was 62 and I had been a lawyer since 1979. And I kind of thought, try something different.
Yeah.
And at that time, Fargo was building the new medical center. And I really wanted to see that finished. And the Fargo market, which was St. Luke's, Fargo Clinic, Merit Care, gave me my start, and I really had a lot of love for the organization and the community, and I wanted to come back and primarily focus on that as a leader and get that project done on time and on budget and get it open. And then I told them, I said I was going to retire.
Wonderful, wonderful. So you became the first legal counsel for Merit Care at the time. Okay, so what are the key responsibilities of a legal counsel, an executive in an organization?
Well, you're basically overseeing any legal matters that the organization has, and I think a lot of people think of healthcare organizations as, all of your issues are going to be healthcare. Well, let's remember, as I said earlier on, I said it's the business of healthcare.
Yeah.
And St. Luke's and Fargo Clinic combined were the largest private employer in North Dakota. And so there are multiple corporations. You have parent companies, and you have the hospital as a corporation, the clinic as a corporation, the ambulance company as a corporation, the laundry and medical incinerator company as a corporation. So you have all these different corporate entities. All of them have different boards and board structures, so you have to guide the organization through all of that corporate structure. I did mergers and acquisitions. If we purchased a company or we purchased a clinical practice, if we sold assets, I worked on the sale of assets, acquisition of real estate. One of the biggest purchases of real estate that I worked on in my probably was when we bought the land that the new hospital sits on. And at the end of the day, it's everything. And then one of the other things that we looked at in the late 90s and early 2000s, malpractice insurance rates were skyrocketing, and not necessarily based upon any jury verdict experiences in the Dakotas and western Minnesota, but nationally. Just like a lot of insurance costs are driven by national trends versus local trends. And you see that today in house insurance and home insurance and car insurance. You see it all. So at that time, the company decided to create its own captive insurance company. And what that means is we were going to self-insure the first layer of liability on any malpractice claim. So basically, then we would have a national insurance company that would insure for any claims over that amount. And so but you have to do that in a structure, and we incorporated a captive insurance company in Vermont. And so every year I had to go to Burlington, Vermont for a meeting, and a lot of companies set up their captive insurance companies in the Cayman Islands and in Bermuda, and I said, no, we're not going to do that because I don't want to ever be in the paper that I was on a trip to Bermuda or the Bahamas or the Cayman Islands. I said, I'll go to Vermont. So it was Vermont's a nice state, but at the end of the day, that's how. So we then also took in-house, I'll call it claims management, so that if someone sued the organization for malpractice, we would manage those claims in-house. And we then had outside counsel. We did not litigate in-house, but I had another lawyer on the team who largely managed those claims.
Okay. So did you have a dual role as a legal counsel and executive?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So
how did you, how did they influence your approach to healthcare administration?
Well, I would say in my original position, when you're sitting at an executive table, and I was part of at that time, Dr. Gilbertson's team and ultimately Dr. Kelby Kravinoff's team after the merger, there's many decisions that come before the executive team. And you're expected to participate, and it may not be a legal question. Obviously, if a legal question crops up in that discussion, you're going to weigh in on it. But I always felt very free and was encouraged by my bosses to, what do I think? What do I think about everything from a marketing decision to an acquisition of land to building a new clinic to whatever it might be. I mean, whatever the decision was, it didn't necessarily mean that my opinion weighed more heavily than anybody else's, but when you're part of an executive team, even if you have your primary function, it's no different than someone who's on the executive team who's the head of HR or the person who's the head of IT.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're at the table of an executive team to weigh in on things that impact the company that may not be your primary duty.
Yeah.
And your opinion will probably be given that weight.
yeah. So will help in making decisions.
But at the same time, if you sit at the table as a lump and don't participate,
Mm-hmm.
you may as well sit in your law office and read contracts all day.
So one thing I think I kind of mentioned that before, is when it comes to healthcare, there are a lot of regulations.
Yes.
Right? So because, even in the media, they talk about how complex that system is. How do you stay updated with the constantly changing healthcare regulations?
Well, I don't anymore.
Okay.
Because I'm retired.
You retired. Okay. Okay. How do you used to?
Yeah. I, as a lawyer, I'm required, and I still am required because I'm still licensed, and to attend continuing education. And in North Dakota and Minnesota, you're required to have 45 credits of continuing ed every 3 years. And so basically my focus for 30 years, whenever I would do my continuing education courses, would be courses relevant to my work. And I found there were certain I belonged to the American Healthcare Lawyers Association. I belonged to the ABA, the American Bar Association Healthcare Forum. And those two organizations put on very focused seminars on healthcare regulatory issues. And so I would pretty much every year I would attend the American Health Lawyers Association annual healthcare law forum. And it's a huge conference with a lot of content. And I would basically in one conference get anywhere between 20 and 25 credits.
Wow.
And so it was a lot of work, but it was also very informative. And then you also get their materials, and then you also have access to their websites. And there's a lot of good content that the organizations put available to their members. And it's really you're self-studying. The other thing that when you have a problem, you're researching the problem. And there may be things that you know off the top of your head, but from my perspective, I was always confirming what I might have known by at least looking at the latest regulatory amendments. And also, there were things that were beyond my expertise. So you would engage outside lawyers or primarily lawyers who specialize. For example, there's an entire thing dealing with healthcare compliance from the standpoint of Medicare requirements for participating healthcare organizations. And there are lawyers who they do nothing all day but guide clients on healthcare regulations related to Medicare. And if it's something unique, I'm not going to guess. And so even though I was in-house, it was also managing my relationship and the organization's relationship with outside legal consultants. And that was part of my responsibility. And then I would help the internal team interpret, okay, what are they saying? How do we apply this? And so how do you stay on top of it? It's self-study. It's through external experts whenever you feel the need for them. And that's it. I mean, there's a lot of things you learn when a problem presents itself, and it's something that you may not have dealt with. I mean, there's a lot of frontline research that I did to say, okay, do I have an answer? And if the answer is murky or unclear, then I might engage some expert on an outside counsel expert who deals nothing with this. Or even if I want some validation because I can tell you right now, federal regulations are not abundantly clear.
Okay. So that's a good, intro to my next question is, some of the biggest challenges when it comes to compliance, biggest compliance challenges that healthcare organizations face.
Well, I think part of it is just, again, knowing what the requirements are and staying on top of the requirements, and then communicating that to I'll call it the operations and the clinical operations people, so that they understand what it is that whether it's the federal government, and there's also regulations that come from the state health department or the state government that you have to be in compliance with. And an organization like Sanford, I mean, you're doing business in Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, and wherever they may be. And, so you're looking at not only federal regulations, but you're looking at every state regulation that may be applicable to any particular thing that you might be doing. For example, your licensure as a hospital in North Dakota is through the state health department, not the federal government. Sanford organizations are, like, for example, the medical center in Fargo is accredited by a national accreditation organization called the Joint Commission on the Accreditation of Healthcare Organizations. And if you are accredited by the Joint Commission, you have a deemed status from Medicare, which means that you, as long as you are fully accredited, you can participate in the Medicare program. Organizations that do not have Joint Commission accreditation can still participate in Medicare, but then they're surveyed by the state health department, whatever state they're located. So at the end of the day, but our organizations were accredited by the Joint Commission. And that's every 3 years. So, and that's a whole nother set of regulations that presumably, if you comply with those regulations, accreditation standards, that presumably if you comply with those accreditation standards and pass your accreditation survey, you then are qualified to bill Medicare.
Okay, so what are the consequences for non-compliance if you fail to comply?
Well, it can be as draconian as revoking your Medicare participation, so you can't bill Medicare for patient care.
Wow. Okay.
Oh yeah, it's significant.
Yes. Okay.
Or if it's bad enough, you could potentially lose your state license to operate. I mean, there are significant consequences, and there are other regulations in the compliance world where they call it fraud and abuse in healthcare billing. So if you're not billing correctly, there's potential that you could be fined, and some of those fines can be enormous. So there are significant consequences to monetary consequences. There are accreditation consequences. There are the ability to even participate in Medicare. Not being able to participate in Medicare also can impact your ability to bill private insurers, could impact your ability to maintain your hospital license. So yes, it's a huge deal, and there are very bright people who work there every day, today even, who assure that the organization is meeting the standards and complying with the regulations.
Wonderful. So, we're going to switch to privacy when it comes to patients' privacy and security. That's a very important topic in healthcare. So how do you address issues related to patients' privacy and data security when you were part of them?
Well, I mean, in my time of, basically, if you start thinking about it, I started doing healthcare law in 1979. And even though I was an administrator, I'll put it in quotes, when I took over as the Fargo president in 2013, I still was a lawyer, so I was involved. They would pull me in every now and then to answer a question. I mean, I have a little bit of experience.
Yeah.
But in my time, things have really changed. I actually worked in medical records, when I first started as a 19-year-old kid off the farm. And basically, privacy of patient information, yes, it was confidential, but it was very vague as to what the standards were. And then, of course, the Healthcare Information Portability and Accountability Act, which people call HIPAA, was enacted, and don't ask me what year it was, but in the 1990s. And that significantly changed the requirements on how patient information is used, how it is maintained, and how the confidentiality is maintained. What you are required as a healthcare provider how you can release it, how you can't release it. And so things really changed significantly in the 46 years I was walking the halls of healthcare organizations. And so basically, the the patient controls the use of their information, and so there are specific requirements for the release form that they must sign, but there are also exceptions where the healthcare organization can in fact release the information. I'm not going to recite them, but there are exceptions, but it's very tightly controlled, and that's that's a federal requirement. Okay. And then there are also state requirements, but I would say that the federal requirements are much more robust than the state requirements.
Okay, so you've been in this industry for decades, 3 decades. You mentioned. What measures do you recommend would you recommend to healthcare providers to protect patients' data?
Follow HIPAA.
Okay.
I mean, they really don't have any choice.
Okay.
I mean, it's at the end of the day, the patient relationship is a confidential relationship, and you want to be able to foster a relationship with your patients where the patients are free to talk about everything. Mm-hmm. And so that the physician or the healthcare team, I should say, is getting the accurate information. And when information is being withheld because there's a lack of trust, mm-hmm. It doesn't necessarily advance the care of that patient. So I would say that, comply is not really a choice. Healthcare organizations are mandated, and I think it's also healthy for the patient physician or healthcare relationship that patients can be assured, and I'm very confident in my former organization's policies and procedures around how information is used. Mm-hmm. So,
okay, wonderful. So, when we were talking about patients, and one thing that pops into my head is malpractice claims. So, how did you help your organization mitigate the risk of malpractice claim when you were in legal counsel?
Well, I mean, the best, generally speaking, again, there are standards of care that are applicable to how you approach care, and I think that the standards that are required of healthcare organizations, how physicians are trained through all med school, and they're teaching them the latest standards of care. And the whole question in malpractice cases is really around, did the healthcare provider meet the standard of care on that particular issue, whatever the patient condition was. Mm-hmm. And in a malpractice case, if something went wrong, it doesn't necessarily mean that there was a breach of the standard of care. It just, complications occur.
Yeah.
And the occurrence of a complication does not mean that there was malpractice or negligence. Basically, in a malpractice case, you've got to show that there was a breach of the standard of care. So in other words, the healthcare provider didn't do what the standard of care would have required in that situation. And so it's, as we talked about before, keeping abreast of standards. It's education. It's always, knowing what is expected and applying what is expected. The other thing that you do is when things go wrong, as they do sometimes, to be introspective about, and I think that's true of life in general, when things don't go the way you expected, to be introspective, to ask why, and to be honest and open about what did we do wrong, what could we have done differently, and to ask those questions. And I think that's advice that I think most people can apply to life in general. Mm-hmm. And then learn from it.
Yeah.
And if there's changes you have to make, or I'll call it course correction, then make your course correction. Because to keep on going blindly forward when you know that what the approach that you've taken isn't working is to achieve what you're trying to achieve, I think is a mistake.
Yeah, yeah. So, what are some of the most common cause of malpractice suits in the healthcare industry?
Well, I'm a little out of the loop, for the last several years, but I would say that when I was I mean, I would, if I was to try to lump, what was one of the common things errors in communication, breakdowns in communication between team members, maybe. I would say that I don't know if that's necessarily true today, but again, as I said, if that's at the root cause of the problem, you try to figure out how you can enhance and minimize the potential for errors in communication. One good example of that is a thing that they changed. I'm not exactly sure the year this was really implemented. There was a series of cases, not necessarily in my organization, but around the country about where what they call wrong side surgery. Where you have two of something, like you have two kidneys, or you have two legs, you have two arms, and you're supposed to do surgery on the right kidney, but somehow right and left get transposed, and surgery is done on the left kidney. Now that's a big deal if the surgery was removal of the kidney, and your right kidney was diseased and the left kidney was healthy, and the healthy kidney got removed. Well, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
So there was enough cases like that nationally, and I will tell you that, think about it, it's called right-left transposition. So in other words, yep, you're supposed to do surgery on the right side, but somehow it gets miscommunicated and the surgery ends up on the wrong side. And typically it only occurs when you've got two of something, like two eyes or whatever it might be, two ears. And I do remember there was a case in North Dakota that wasn't our organization, but where I think they did the surgery on the wrong ear. But anyway, so they began a process of marking the site. And that has pretty much become the standard now, where, for example, and I know this because I had surgery on both of my shoulders in the last 5 years, and on one of my knees. And before they do surgery, the surgeon comes in and marks the site and confirms with the patient that this is, okay, we're doing surgery on the right knee, right? Yes. And that gets confusing, especially you say, we're doing surgery on the right, and I say right, and you say correct. But so that's why patients are being marked. It's a way to enhance communication, and that, quite frankly, flows out of some errors that were made, again, not within our organization, but elsewhere in the country, and it became a best practice. And the other thing that they started, and I think it's actually become a requirement from the Joint Commission, is that you get into surgery and there's a stop. And basically there's what they call a timeout before the surgery starts, and a confirmation, everyone in the room, what are we doing? We're doing surgery we're doing a meniscus repair on Paul's right knee. Okay. So, again, that's two examples of enhancing communication when you can see where, like I said, right-left transposition, where you could see it. And it had happened, and that kind of now has become the standard. And I think that what most organizations do is you look at what's happening nationally, may have happened in your own organization, and as I said, I don't ever remember a right-left transposition in our organization, but at the end of the day, it became the standard of care nationally.
Wow. Yeah, so, and the other side of my question was, how can healthcare providers better protect themselves against those claims? But you kind of covered that a little bit. While you were legal counsel, did you have time where you have to advocate for policy change?
For policy change?
Yeah,
yes.
On behalf of your organization.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've appeared in the legislature on legislation that was being proposed that would impact healthcare organizations in the state. Also, I did a lot of work, quite frankly, on internal policies. I remember there was a time that kind of flowing out of some questions that we were seeing or issues that we were seeing, we actually drafted legislation around that we brought to Bismarck and was ultimately adopted, and that dealt with access to information that because you want to encourage organizations to self-assess and have conversations about what went wrong or what is not working well. But at the same time, if you want to have full and frank internal conversations, you want that information to be, I'll call it risk management conversations. Mm-hmm. So we proposed, and it was passed, legislation specifically dealing with access to risk management information that external organizations, or in fact in malpractice cases, might want to seek access to that information, and there are limits to access to that information. But also just internal policy. For example, we talked about HIPAA. When HIPAA was enacted, we had significant policy revisions on how medical records or medical information was to be handled. Another example are governance policies. As I said, healthcare is a business as well, and so we drafted and adopted policies that the board of directors, board of trustees adhered to around good governance. And since the organization is a nonprofit, tax-exempt organization, the Internal Revenue Service actually had some standards that they would like to see in regard to governance policies for boards of trustees and boards of directors. The state of North Dakota, at least the Fargo operations, the companies are incorporated in the state of North Dakota. The state of North Dakota, both the Nonprofit Business Corporations Act and the Business Corporations Act have standards for corporations and boards of directors. Mm-hmm. So our policy is really, you're taking the IRS requirements, you're taking the state requirements, and then just again, good governance. There are organizations that really focus on governance in healthcare, nonprofit healthcare organizations, and they come out with recommendations on good governance. Mm-hmm. And so really it was about leadership, governance, and what leaders of organizations should do to really assure that they're led in an ethical and in a ethical way. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because you were a legal counsel, an executive. I guess my question is, how do you balance the interests of the patients, the healthcare providers in your organization, and also those regulatory compliance or regulations, if you will?
Well, I mean, I did not interact directly with patients.
Okay.
But it would be very unusual for me to have interacted directly with patients, possible in if we're involved in a defense of a claim. Mm-hmm. But I would say that the one thing that, as legal counsel, as an executive, was working to assure that the organization is, through whatever means that was applicable to my world, providing the optimal care for the patients that we took care of, because they put their trust in us as an organization. And even though I wasn't directly giving patient care, the reality is that all of us on the team are working towards making sure that our patients are given the best care possible.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So, you were, executive, legal. Again, I got to focus on that. So, what leadership qualities do you believe are essential for success in the healthcare industries?
I think that the qualities are the same you would see in almost any leader. Okay. And I think that kind of going back, first of all, I would say that there are individuals who, in my mind, I have always respected, and I've referred to Mr. Finney. Dr. Gilbertson was another who really gave me a great opportunity. He was my boss when it was Medicare, and then Kelby Krabenoft when he was my boss when it was Sanford, and actually worked with the current leaders of Sanford Health, Bill Gasson, and great leader. So I always looked at it from the standpoint that, what can you learn from others, and be open you really need to be open to learning as a leader, and what works for them, and there are great role models out there. Sometimes you have to look for them. And I would say in the case of the 20-year-old Paul who went to see the president of the hospital to chew the fat about what I should do with my life, what path I should take to my career, you kind of have to have the guts to ask. I mean, some people would be afraid to ask. I'll call it people who are in positions to give advice. And I have always found that most of the people I worked with were always open to talking about things, even if you're struggling as an individual, with a problem as to how to make things work, how to advance some initiative that you're trying. You can't be afraid to ask. And because being open to learning every day of your life. I mean, I'm 72, and I got to tell you, I learn every day from a lot of different people, and I welcome that. I hope I'm imparting some education or learning on other people, but I would say you have to have the guts to ask questions. You have to be willing to learn. You have to use your voice when you think things are not right. Sometimes that's very difficult. Yeah. But you can do it in a way that I think is respectful. So I really, I never had a recipe. What's interesting is I thought about this after our first meeting, and I said, I don't know that I ever actually interviewed for a job.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I might have interviewed. Oh, I did interview for my file clerk job.
Okay.
In 1971, and maybe somewhat of an interview with the law firm in '79, but I don't think so because I had clerked with them. In any event, but a real job interview, my job's always I was constantly growing and evolving as in my career.
Okay.
Not everybody has that. I don't know what the right word is, chance, but you just have to. I have no regrets. I love my career, and I don't know that I would do anything different.
Yeah. So I have before the end of the show, I have two questions. One is regarding with technology and innovation. Now that you are out of the game, you're retired. What has the rise of technology and innovation in the healthcare industry, or how has that impacted you?
Well, I'm more of a patient now than I am anything else.
Okay.
But I will tell you that, I watched the change of technology. I mean, when I think about the fact that in 1971 to 74, one of my jobs was to find medical records, and they were all paper. And basically, at that time, you could have a patient show up in the ER, and their record might be in the clinic somewhere. And so someone had to find the record. But unfortunately, the physicians and the team are seeing the patient with very little information other than what the patient can impart. And as you can imagine, a trauma situation, the patient sometimes can't really tell you a whole lot. So when the electronic patient record evolved and became a thing, and I will say that it significantly enhanced the access to information for the healthcare team. And that was a big learning curve for the healthcare team, I would say, because it went, but I can't imagine functioning today without it. And a personal anecdote is, we have MyChart, which is the Sanford Epic company's electronic record. It's on my phone.
Yeah.
All of my health information is accessible on my phone, or I can get on my computer and look at my record. I love it. And from my perspective, I went through chemo in 2014 for a lymphoma I was diagnosed. About 2 months after I took over as market president. And throughout my chemo and since, and I still get infusions every 28 days to keep my immune system healthy, I manage my healthcare all on my phone. My appointments, my conversations with my doctor. it's a wonderful thing. And I couldn't imagine being a patient now without it. And I feel that it has given patients much more direct access to their personal information than what was in paper when I started the job in 1971. So I think technology, and another example I would give you is in the early 1970s. I remember because one of my jobs was to certify the length of stay for different diagnosis groups as a quality review nurse. And I remember that if a patient came in for an aortic aneurysm repair, abdominal aneurysm repair, it was an open procedure where they had to open your gut, and it was at least a minimum stay of 2 weeks.
Wow.
Technology has evolved now where I believe those patients can go home in the same day or without an open procedure. And it's all done with catheters through, I believe, don't quote me, through an artery.
Yeah.
And the patient can go home the same day or at least the next day.
Wow.
So that's technology.
Yes.
And many procedures are done with robotic assistance. I had a procedure in 2008. Used to be an open procedure that was done with laparoscopically and basically 3 little scars.
Wow.
And went home the same day.
Wow.
So
wonderful.
That's all technology and advancement of training of the healthcare team, the physicians, the nurses, everything. And the learning curve is big, and particularly when it was first implemented. But I suppose there are people out there who would prefer to go back. I don't know who they are, but I can tell you right now, as a patient who's had surgery and chemo and treatment, and I have zero desire to go back to the old way it was done with paper records. So,
and I don't think it will go back.
No, I don't think it will go back, thankfully.
So, one important part of professional lunch is really to get advice from accomplished professionals, people who have spent decades in a certain industry. What advice would you give to aspiring healthcare lawyers or people who want to follow your path?
Well, I think one of the best advice I would give is to get a job maybe in the industry you think you want to be involved in very early in college, or some can even do it in high school. Mm-hmm. But get a job, even if it's not a job you're going to do for the rest of your life. I didn't anticipate being a file clerk for the rest of my life. Yeah. But it was a job. First of all, I needed the money. Mm-hmm. And the fact of the matter is that it opened up my eyes to things I hadn't really thought about. So, and sometimes, you shouldn't job jump, but if you get into an organization and you start out, I started out as a very low level job, be open to, are there other opportunities in that company? Be open to doing different things. And I think the advice that Mr. Finney gave me in 1971 is your path to what you're meant to do in life is not necessarily a direct path. Some people can do that. They can say, I'm going to do X, and it's a very direct path. Yes. I wasn't one of those people. And to me, it was a process of discovery. Mm-hmm. And I think you got to be open to discovering that. And I think getting a job, even if it's a few hours a week in a company or whether it's in the industry or an industry you might be interested in, it will help you sort through if you're really indecisive about what you want to do. And then be open to looking for other opportunities in the same company, or don't job jump. Yeah. Job jumping is probably one of the worst things I think people can do. Okay. But again, what's a reasonable time in the job? I guess I'll leave that up to the person to decide. But at the end of the job, and do the best job you can. Yes. I would say that I feel like I did a good job at my job over my career, but other people have to judge that. Yeah.
Wonderful. So, the show is about yourself, you and your career, the field. We talk a great deal about healthcare. So, one question, what has been the biggest challenge you overcome in your professional life, and what have been the most satisfying accomplishments, the biggest accomplishments that you have?
Well, I got to say my wife and kids.
Okay.
That's my biggest accomplishment. But career-wise, I guess I'd have to say that. What was your first question?
What's the biggest challenge, and also what is the biggest accomplishment?
I would say the biggest challenge was learning what I needed to learn as I advanced. And, whether it was college, law school, as we talked about, continuing education, there was a lot of demands that, my career has not been a job that my knowledge was static. It was, and so keeping on top of the things I needed to know, and delivering that information in a way that was understandable. Luckily, I really enjoy writing, so it's and communicating verbally and in writing. I don't know. I mean, the biggest satisfaction I have is that I never thought when I was in high school that I would ever achieve or do what I got to do in my career. I never did. I never saw it. It was, I'm a farm kid. And, I mean, before working at the hospital, my last job was milking cows.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like when I think back, I said it was almost 50 years of challenges and change and open to education, open to learning, people who I admire, people who are willing to, and I attribute my success to all of that. And obviously I played a part in it, but the biggest satisfaction is that I actually got to do what I got to do.
Yeah. Wonderful. Oh, Paul, man, I want to thank you for being on Professional Lunch today. This is the first time we have an attorney and someone who is so involved in healthcare, in the healthcare industry. So I appreciate your time being on Professional Lunch and sharing your knowledge and your advice. The road to success is not a straight line, at least for most people. Right? So sometimes we just got to go and being open to ask questions and get involved to accomplish what we want to accomplish and find success. So any last thoughts as we are closing down the conversation?
Well, I guess the best advice I would give to anyone who's, your age or looking for, trying to sort out what they're meant to do in life is, don't be afraid to find those mentors. Mm-hmm. And people who are in the industry that you at least are focused on, and ask questions. And I think most strong leaders are willing to take the time and have conversations and give advice. And because they've had a lot of experience, especially when you have people my age who I'm clearly at end of career, but I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation. Maybe it'll help someone, maybe it won't. But, I guess I got to say that I've always appreciated the people I had the opportunity to work with who were willing to talk to me and really became sounding boards and could help me, especially when I was trying to sort out a path, give me some direction.
Wonderful, wonderful. Don't be afraid to find mentors. This is a perfect note to end the conversation today, because Professional Lunch is a mentoring platform. We are working on building our platform for young professionals to connect with more experienced ones for mentoring, for a mentoring relationship. This is a great advice. I really appreciate that, because this is what Professional Lunch is about. Creating a mentoring platform for young professionals to connect with more experienced one. Paul, thank you again for being on Professional Lunch today. It's a pleasure to have you on there. So hopefully we didn't get to cover all the questions that we have, but hopefully we'll get a chance to chat again in the future and continue this conversation. Thank you so much, Paul, for being on Professional Lunch today.
Thank you.
Now, Professional Lunch is a non-profit organization. We rely on guests, we rely on friends, we rely on other partners to keep the podcast going, and more importantly, to keep building our platform for young professionals. So, you know how to reach out to me. Find me on LinkedIn, find me on our website, professionallunch.com, and reach out to me to tell me how you want to help. I'm always open for coffee So reach out to me, professionallunch.com or on LinkedIn or on Facebook or even on YouTube, and we can have coffee and chat on how you can help. As you can see, we are bringing some very big names guests on the podcast to bring you the best content that we can. So we appreciate your support. Thank you so much for listening. Now, this is the part that I tell you it's up to you to make today a great day. Have a great day. Paul, thank you, sir.
Thank you.